Hmm. So the actor is the one that performs on the stage? Well, I guess you learn something new every day. Oh, hey students. I'm not feeling so well today, so I'm recording this video lecture for you. Our topic today is theater for social change, and we're going to learn about some of the really cool ways that we can use theater to affect change in our society. Come along with me. So, how do we define this phenomenon? Well, one definition is theater with a conscious social perspective, usually with a goal to be achieved. So, this is not theater primarily for entertainment purposes, right? When we think back to the beginning of the class, we talked about theater as art or theater as entertainment. This is a little bit more on the art side in that it has a goal. Now, the goal here is not necessarily artistic exploration as having something achieved. They have something that they want to achieve, a message that they want to communicate to the audience of the theater piece. Another way of thinking about it is a piece of theater that's performed as a way to sort of remove obstacles or to educate the audience or the performers about how to open doors for those who are less high in society, those who are a little bit on the lower on the socioeconomic scale. So we're going to take a look at a few examples today in class of how theater for social change has manifested in this country primarily. We're going to take a little look at street protest theater. You can see an image of that there, or maybe there, of these two clowns hugging a police officer who looks very uncomfortable as part of a street protest theater. We'll also take a look at one particular type of theater and one theater artist named Augusto Boal and his style of theater for social change that he practiced in Brazil called theater of the oppressed. Next, we'll take a look at how theater for young audiences, sometimes referred to as children's theater, can use theater for social change as a way of achieving its goals and sort of more the socialization aspect of theater, how to teach children how to operate in a society. Finally, we'll take a look at bread and puppet theater as another aspect of theater for social change. And then finally, we'll take a look at farm workers theater or Teatro Campesino by Luis Valdez. So throughout this lecture, there'll be a bunch of videos. I'm going to put the link in the description below this video so you can click through and watch it yourself. But this is an example of street protest theater in Iraq. Let's move on from that one. The first one we're going to spend some time on is theater of the oppressed. So this was a approach to theater for social change, or a way of enacting theater for social change, created by this Brazilian theater artist named Augusto Boal. He started off by having performances of his theater company amongst those people who were working in the fields or as sort of laborers or day laborers in northern Brazil. And his purpose, the message he was trying to get off, or the door he was trying to open, was to make sure that those people who were working were not being exploited, that they could understand their rights and they could ask the landlords or the people who run the farms to give them better wages, give them access to water, access to healthcare facilities, and these things. Primarily, he was focused on educating the farm laborers to realizing their position and empowering them to do something to change their position. I think I talked about that there. Now, what was interesting about this approach, theater of the oppressed, and there's books and books and books on this particular approach, but we're just going to talk about one or two things here, is that Boal asked his audience to act out the mistreatment that they were experiencing in their places of work or on the farm. So this is a theater artist who doesn't create a play and then bring it in and then show it to people. He is co-creating with the actual people who are being oppressed. And he is asking them to bring their experience to the table, bring their experience to the performance, either by writing, performing, or what have you. This way allowed Boal to develop what he called the spectator, a spectator who was also an actor. So the people he was performing for, these sort of disempowered workers in northern Brazil, not only were performing, but they were also performing for the sort of audience of their peers. So everybody was sort of involved. Further refinements of this technique by Boal allowed like audience members to sort of like tag in, like you sort of tag the actor and then you become that character. and then you sort of do your spin on this somewhat improvised theater piece that you're all creating, and you might be able to sort of tag out, and then another person comes in and you sit back down. And so we have this fluid relationship between the audience and the performers, that sort of one could embody both of those roles somewhat simultaneously, or perhaps sequentially. Audience, and now I'm performing, and now I'm back to audience, right? So it's a fluid movement here. There's a great video where Bawal himself talks about his idea about what is the theater of the oppressed. So I recommend that you watch that. It's right in the description below. The second thing we're going to take a look at as an aspect of theater for social change is this idea of theater for young audiences. Previously, maybe children's theater, but children's theater is sort of a more constricting term. So now there's this bigger idea of theater for young audiences, because someone who's 18 years old, 17 years old might have a different belief system or different needs than somebody who's like 4 years old, right? So the broad term children is a little bit constricting. Sorry, we would like a broader term like young audiences. So that's why this term is used here. So you might be familiar with this in your school if you ever had like a company of actors or a troupe, or maybe even your principal called an assembly and talked about the problem of bullying in your school. So they might have had an exercise where the teachers sort of acted as, I'm the bully and I'm the kid that's getting bullied, and they might have played the role in front of you. That would be an example of theater for social change. Yeah. But also professional companies will put on fully scripted plays and produce them fully, and people will come and buy tickets and watch the show as well. So in this one example here, we see on the bottom here, this Choose Your Life is an example of an anti-bullying exercise done by adults, but performed for students or young adults or young audiences here, where a mediator would come in and we'd have different roles: the bully, those who are bullied, and then bystanders. And they could sort of select, okay, so what is the bully doing here? And then they would switch. What is the kid who is being bullied? How is he reacting? What is he doing? And finally, what is the role of the bystanders? Should they intervene? Should they not? Should they tell an adult? So they walk you through the process here. So this is an example of theater because we have actor, audience, and shared space, but also with a purpose, opening the door for those kids who are bullied or for the bystanders to stop the bullying. Yeah. Now we're going to take a look at two specific examples of theater for social change troupes. One is called the Bread and Puppet Theater. And if you're thinking, what's the Bread and Puppet Theater? If you said it involves bread and puppets, you got the jackpot. That's exactly what the theater is all about. It was founded in the 60s by a German man named Peter Schumann. Here, you can see him in the picture here, right below. And the purpose of Bread and Puppet Theater is to enact social change through building a community when watching a show, primarily puppet shows. And Schumann's proposal was to, during the show, bake bread, fresh bread. So the audience is like watching the show and they're smelling the bread, and then they serve the bread during the puppet performances. So as the audience watches the show, they're also eating the bread. So they're sort of having this sense of community in that they're smelling the bread, they're sharing the bread, they're eating the bread, they're sharing it, the performance with the actors and also with the other members of the audience. So that's the idea, that we create this big community. So there's not this divide between actors and audience, and that's it. It's a little bit more fluid, And we can get the message across that Theater for Social Change is trying to do. The message comes across better or stronger because we're sharing with each other, is the idea. It's not too far from here, actually. It's in rural Vermont. I think it's in Glover, Vermont. And they make use of non-traditional theater spaces, in that they don't have a proper purpose-built theater space. They'll perform in barns, they'll tour around and perform out in the fields or on the hillside. We'll see a picture of that in a second. But then they'll also do street theater as well. So a little bit like that, the video of the Iraqi protests that we saw before. They'll have processional theater where they'll walk down the street and perform with their puppets. I don't think they hand out bread at those shows. That's a little bit different, but if they're in a place, they will bake bread. What's interesting about them is they have an environmentally conscious as well as a socially conscious sort of mission that they're following through in their theater practice. So one is that they use recycled materials primarily to build their puppets. And the other aspect of bread and puppet theater is they have huge puppets. I'm talking puppets that require 4 or 5 people to manipulate. Maybe they're not as complicated as a King Kong, the puppet from the King Kong musical that we took a look at, but they're quite big nonetheless. They have a strong message. One of their social messages is to be pacifist. They oppose war, any sort of armed conflict in any way, shape, or form. And during the Vietnam War, you can see after the founding of the Bread and Puppet Theater, that was a big issue, was American involvement in Vietnam, and subsequently any other sort of military conflict the United States has been in. They have orchestrated protests or theater for social change, processions, parades, in which they espouse their own beliefs and try to get other people to understand their message. One way of expressing their thoughts is this document that they put together, a manifesto, which is called Why Cheap Art Manifesto. We'll take a look at that on the next page. Manifesto here is sort of a set of artistic goals that a company or individual can put out as a way of providing guidance, probably to themselves, but also to the general public or anybody else who reads it as to what they think their art should be or what their guiding principles are in their creation of art. So that's what this is. So the Why Cheap Art Manifesto. Let's take a look. The Why Cheap Art Manifesto. People have been thinking too long that art is a privilege of the museums and the rich. Art is not business. It does not belong to banks and fancy investors. Art is food. You can eat it. You can't eat it, but it feeds you. Art has to be cheap and available to everybody. It needs to be everywhere because it is inside of the world. Art soothes pain. Art wakes up sleepers. Art fights against war and stupidity. Art sings hallelujah. Art is for kitchens. Art is like good bread. Art is like green trees. Art is like white clouds in the blue sky. Art is cheap. Hurrah! So, an example of what the Bread and Puppet Theater's artistic manifesto is. You can see a lot of the points that I highlighted on the previous slide are borne out here. Art is like bread. Art should be cheap. What materials are cheap? Recycled materials, or materials that you can get free. Art is not for the privileged few that are kept in museums, locked behind, gates that you have to pay a ticket to go through and take a look at. Their philosophy is a little bit more immediate and right now in the present moment, right? Part of that communal sharing of bread, almost like communion. If you go to a church service and they break bread and you have the bread and wine at the end of a like a Catholic or Episcopalian church service, much the same way we're sort of sharing the bread, sharing this, taking in a food together to create some sort of community here is the Bread and Puppet Theater. But I bet you're wondering, what do these puppets look like? Let's take a look. Oh, hold on. There's bread right there. So I promised big scale puppets. We got a big scale puppet here. You can see how many people. I mean, pause the video and see if you can count how many people are manipulating the puppet here. And then you also have a group of characters here, sort of in the larger scale, either masks or walkabout puppets, like sort of human body-sized puppets here in the front of this character, Mother Earth here, who's sort of encompassing all with her hands. Here's a video. A lot of their big scale puppets are saved. They have a barn that they converted into a museum in Vermont. And there's a little bit of a tour here, which I think is kind of cool. So feel free to take a look at that in the description below. Here's an example of some of their anti-war protests, sort of street theater, a processional street theater. So, you have this character here of war, which is dressed like the Grim Reaper with very sensible shoes. Because, I mean, hey, you might be playing the Grim Reaper, but foot pain is nothing to be sneezed at. And then you have these sort of very big human body scale, bigger than human body scale puppets, huge hands, huge heads, all made of recycled materials and stuff. And then they use that to put forth their message here. Here's a performance in one of their barns at their sort of farm in rural Virginia. Once again, you see huge scale puppets and puppets that don't have many articulating parts, right? This doesn't look like this puppet here in pink on the far right side of the picture, or on the stage left side of the picture, has a mouth or even eyes that are opening, right? It's sort of manipulated by one actor here too. I hear Schumann playing his violin, and we have the audience sort of in the foreground of the image here too. Right, so here's another video of the Bread and Puppet Theater in action. I'll let you take a look at that as well in the description below. Another example of their touring company, they'll have these repurposed school buses in the background, sort of pull up to a rural area, have a performance, sort of use very pieced together or recycled material you can see to have a painting and have big puppets here. I think this is a particular performance talking about a few years ago, the NSA sort of phone hacking or surveillance scandal where they found out like the National Security Administration was spying on Americans' communications, so that was an issue for them. So they put this performance together where you see God is like listening in, this guy's listening in, this dog character, everybody's sort of listening to everybody as an aspect of that. The final group we'll take a look at is the Farm Workers Theater, which was founded in Delano, Southern California, by Luis Valdez in 1965, also known as El Teatro Campesino. So this was a group with a specific mission for a specific group of people, and that was the migrant farm laborers that were in Southern California. California grows a lot of this country's produce, everything from avocados to grapes, and so those people were being exploited by the landowners and the people who ran the farms for various reasons. And Luis Valdez and these other people said, hey, maybe we can organize theater as a way of educating farm workers to their rights and that they can have the power to speak up and advocate for better conditions, and also to speak to the general public, anybody who saw the play, about the plights and the concerns of these farm workers who were usually marginalized people who were excluded from the national dialogue on these sorts of issues. So things that they wanted were better work conditions. These are specific goals too. Better work conditions for the farmers, better hours, better pay, better sleeping conditions. Sometimes their sleeping quarters were quite poor. So those were all issues that the Farm Workers Theater sought to address through theater, to change society through theater. If you saw the film a few years ago, Cesar Chavez, there's a very brief moment. It's maybe 10 seconds or less than that, where you see an instance of farm workers theater happening as part of this sort of grape strike and the empowerment of farm workers in Southern California. What farm workers theater did is they went out to farms on these flatbed trucks, and they would pull up, the farm workers would be there, they'd be protesting, and they would sing, they perform what's known as actos, or short skits, just right on the back of the truck. So think about that. That would be a non-traditional theater space with probably minimal set. You can have costume as well, but you wouldn't have electric amplification. You might not have very powerful electric lights if you have there, so it's probably during the daytime. And it would be sort of bringing the theater to the people, right? Touring that. So you wouldn't have the controlled environment of a proscenium space. But the purpose here was to educate and encourage migrant workers to band together and speak up in order to get better conditions, better pay, and be treated better than they were being currently treated. They've also written and performed and produced and toured other plays, fully scripted dramas. One is called Los Vendidos. There's several versions of that play, filmed versions of that play on YouTube. You can check those out if you'd like. But 1979's musical named Zoot Suit is what we're going to take a look at in a second here. So that was a fully scripted musical based on the Zoot Suit riots in the 40s in Southern California. And that has a distinction of being the first Chicano or Mexican American musical on Broadway. In fact, it launched Edward James Olmos's career as well, because he's one of the most iconic roles from that particular show. So let's see what Luis Valdez says about himself and about his founding and his thought process behind creating this Farm Workers Theater. So I'll let you watch that video in the description below. This is the video version of Los Vendidos as well. Feel free to take a look at that if you'd like, or there's other versions of that on YouTube as well. So El Teatro Campesino, still around today. In fact, here's the mission statement from their own website. It is our mission to create a popular art with 21st century tools that presents a more just and accurate account of human history, while encouraging the young women and men of a new generation to take control of their own destiny through creative discipline, vibrant education, economic independence, and artistic excellence. So Valdez here is advocating in his mission statement, a little bit like the Bread and Puppet Theater's Cheap Art Manifesto. This mission statement serves somewhat of the same purpose of saying, this is the company, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we do it. Vibrant education, economic independence, artistic excellence, right? So those are ways of getting their word out, ways of using theater for social change. If you want to check out their website, elteatrocampesino.com, that's their website. And you can find out more about them as well. I think they still, now they have though they did perform out in the fields on flatbed trucks, now they have a theater that's in Delano, California, I believe, like Physical Space, which is their headquarters. But they still do touring events as well. So here's a short little PBS NewsHour documentary sort of type film on Zoot Suit. It's a pretty interesting piece. I'll put the link in the description below. But one of the big takeaways there, listen to the interviews with some of the artists and actors and Valdez himself, and he says, I like entertainment with a purpose. So at least in his take, he wanted something that was a lot of fun with a lot of energy that would engage people, not drive them away with negative emotions, but bring them in with positive emotions, with sometimes slapstick humor, with over-the-top characters, with all kinds of music to really engage people in that way. So if we can compare and contrast, Bread and Puppet Theater is community through eating bread, baking bread, watching the puppet show together. And with Farm Workers Theater is about engaging people and bringing them in through music, through a shared experience here, and by talking to people about directly issues that directly affect them. So for next time, we're going to take a look at the producer and the stage manager, two very important roles in theater that we haven't really talked about too much. So that should be pretty exciting. As well as for next time, make sure that you do your traditional plot structure project quiz. Okay, that's considered a quiz, and that's due on Tuesday, the 18th. I extended that deadline, by the way. I made that an announcement. Finally, make sure that you read Dutchman. It's not a long play, it's a one-act play, but it's the play that we're reading as an example of theater for social change. So think about what we've talked about in this lecture and what you've seen in the videos. What was the playwright of Dutchman, Leroy Jones or Amiri Baraka, what was he trying to get across to the audience? What door was he trying to open? How was he trying to include more people? And then also don't forget to take the quiz on that, which is also due on Tuesday before class starts. Okay, great. Well, hopefully I'll be feeling better on Tuesday, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you. Okay, bye.